Sarah's heart raced as she stared at the angry HOA notice on her front door. Violation. Unauthorized lawn signs. But this wasn't about petty rules. Her simple safety message had put her family in grave danger. With the clock ticking, she had to find a way to expose the truth before it was too late. Sarah snatched the HOA notice off the door, crumpling it in her fist. "This is unbelievable," she yelled, storming into the house. Her husband Jack looked up from the kitchen table, brow furrowed with concern. "What happened?" "The HOA is demanding I take down the safety signs on our lawn. Can you believe the nerve of these people?" Sarah paced the room, fuming. Jack set down his coffee mug. "Safety signs? What are you talking about?" Sarah sighed. "Last week, there was a string of break-ins down the street. I put up those beware of dog and security cameras in use signs to deter burglars. You know how the HOA is about lawn decor, but this is different. It's a safety issue." "I see." Jack stood and placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm not taking them down, that's for sure. Those signs could protect our family." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to call the HOA president and give him a piece of my mind." Jack winced. "Honey, you know how volatile Margaret can be. Maybe we should just comply for now and deal with it later." "No way. This isn't about petty lawn decorations. It's about keeping our kids safe." Sarah grabbed her phone. "I'm going to that HOA meeting tonight, and I'm not leaving until they rescind this ridiculous violation." As Sarah furiously dialed the number, Jack watched her, worry etched on his face. He knew how stubborn his wife could be, and he feared the consequences of challenging the powerful HOA. But he also couldn't ignore the valid safety concerns behind her lawn signs. Whatever happened, he'd have to be there to support her. The phone clicked, and a clipped voice answered. HOA President Margaret Simmons speaking. "Margaret, this is Sarah Benson. I just got your violation notice about my lawn signs, and I'm not happy." Sarah's tone was sharp and unyielding. There was a brief pause. "Ms. Benson, you know the rules. All outdoor decor must be approved by the HOA. Those signs are an eyesore and a violation." "This isn't about aesthetics, Margaret. There's been a string of break-ins on our street. I put up those signs to deter burglars and keep my family safe." Sarah's voice rose with anger. "You can't just dismiss that as a violation." Another pause, then a frosty response. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Benson, but the HOA has strict guidelines. If you don't remove the signs immediately, we'll be forced to take legal action." Sarah clenched her jaw. "Legal action? Over safety signs? This is outrageous. The decision is final. Remove the signs by tomorrow or face the consequences." With that, the line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart pounding. She knew challenging the HOA was risky, but her family's security was on the line. She had to find a way to make them see reason, even if it meant going to war. Sarah's mind raced as she paced the living room, Jack watching anxiously. This is unbelievable. How can they threaten legal action over something that's clearly for the safety of our neighborhood? Jack sighed. "You know how the HOA is, honey. They're obsessed with maintaining property values and keeping everything uniform. Lawn signs, even for a good cause, are seen as an eyesore. But they're missing the bigger picture," Sarah exclaimed. "Those signs could deter would-be burglars and keep our family safe. Doesn't that matter more than some silly aesthetic rules?" Jack placed a hand on her arm, trying to calm her. I know. But you also know how stubborn Margaret and the rest of the HOA board can be. They're not going to back down easily on this." Sarah shook her head. "I have to at least try. I'm going to that HOA meeting tonight, and I'm not leaving until they understand how important those signs are." "Just be careful, okay?" Jack said, worry creasing his brow. "You know how confrontational Margaret can get. I don't want you to say something you'll regret and make the situation even worse. Sarah nodded, though her expression was determined. I have to at least try, Jack. This isn't just about the lawn signs anymore. It's about keeping our family safe. Later that evening, Sarah strode into the HOA meeting, chin held high. The other residents fell silent as she approached the front of the room, where Margaret sat flanked by the rest of the board members. Ms. Benson, how unexpected, Margaret said, her tone dripping with disdain. I assume you're here about the violation notice we sent you. Sarah squared her shoulders. Yes, I am. And I'm here to make it clear that I have no intention of removing those safety signs from my lawn. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Margaret's eyes narrowed. Ms. Benson, you are directly defying the HOA guidelines. If you don't remove those signs immediately, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. Legal action? Sarah scoffed. Over lawn signs that are meant to protect our neighborhood. That's absurd, and you know it. Margaret's lips thinned into a tight line. The rules are the rules, Ms. Benson. We can't make exceptions, even for so-called safety reasons. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes blazing. But don't you see? Those signs could be the difference between our neighborhood being targeted by burglars or not. Isn't that more important than your precious aesthetic guidelines? The room erupted in a chorus of voices, some siding with Sarah, others defending the HOA's position. Margaret raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Ms. Benson, I'm going to give you one last chance. Remove those signs by tomorrow or face the consequences. Her gaze was unyielding. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Jack gently placed a hand on her shoulder, shaking his head. Come on, honey. Let's go. Reluctantly, Sarah allowed Jack to guide her out of the meeting, her mind racing with frustration and determination. She knew she couldn't back down, but the threat of legal action weighed heavily on her. She had to find a way to make the HOA understand the importance of those safety signs, even if it meant going to war. As Sarah and Jack walked back to their car, the tension in the air was palpable. Sarah's hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, her mind whirling with a mix of anger and concern. I can't believe they're threatening legal action, she muttered, shaking her head. Those signs are for the safety of our entire neighborhood, and they're more worried about petty aesthetics. Jack gently placed a hand on her arm, his expression empathetic. I know, honey, but you have to understand, the HOA is ruthless when it comes to enforcing their rules. They won't back down easily, no matter how valid your concerns are. Sarah let out a frustrated sigh. I just don't get it. How can they be so blind to the bigger picture? Those signs could literally save lives if there's another string of break-ins. I know. Jack squeezed her arm reassuringly. But you can't fight them head-on like this. It's only going to make them dig in their heels even more. Sarah's brow furrowed as she considered his words. So what do you suggest I do? Just roll over and let them trample all over me? No, of course not. Jack shook his head. But you need to be strategic about this. Maybe there's a way to work with the HOA, or find a compromise that keeps the signs up while still adhering to their rules. Sarah chewed on her lip, her mind racing. Okay. You might be right. I can't just go in guns blazing and expect them to see reason. There has to be a way to appeal to them without provoking a full-blown war. Jack nodded, relief washing over his features. That's my girl. I know you're passionate about this, but we have to be smart about it. No more confrontational HOA meetings, at least for now. Sarah let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. All right, fine. I'll try a different approach. But I'm not taking down those signs, Jack. Not until I've exhausted every other option. I know. Jack offered her a reassuring smile. We'll figure this out, I promise. In the meantime, let's go home, have a nice dinner, and regroup. You need to calm down before you do anything rash. Sarah nodded reluctantly, then allowed Jack to guide her to the car. As they drove home, her mind was already worrying with potential strategies. She knew the HOA was a formidable adversary, but she was determined to find a way to keep her family safe, even if it meant playing by their rules. Once back at the house, Sarah paced the living room, lost in thought. Jack watched her silently, offering the occasional suggestion or words of encouragement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah paused and turned to him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I think I've got an idea," she said, a hint of the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But I'm going to need your help." Jack straightened up, his own expression brightening. "Anything, honey. What do you need me to do?" Sarah's smile widened. "Okay, here's the plan." The next morning, Sarah awoke with a renewed sense of determination. She quickly got dressed and headed downstairs, where Jack was already sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Morning," he greeted her, looking up as she entered the kitchen. "You seem more relaxed today. Did you come up with a plan?" Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think so, but I'm going to need your help to pull it off." Jack set down his mug, his brow furrowing with concern. "What exactly do you have in mind?" "I don't want you doing anything reckless that could get us in more trouble with the HOA." "Don't worry, it's nothing like that," Sarah reassured him. "I've been thinking about this all night, and I think I've found a way to work with the HOA instead of against them." Jack raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Okay, I'm listening. What's the plan?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Well, you know how the HOA is always harping on about curb appeal and property values, right? I think we can use that to our advantage." Jack nodded slowly, his mind working. "Go on." "Instead of just putting up those generic, 'beware of dog' and security cameras signs, what if we design something more aesthetically pleasing?" Sarah suggested, "Something that still gets the message across, but in a way that fits the HOA's guidelines." Jack's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. That's an interesting idea. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I was thinking we could do something like a custom-made wooden sign with a nice stained finish and maybe even some subtle decorative elements," Sarah explained, her hands gesturing animatedly. "That way, it's not just a plain old yard sign, but something that actually enhances the look of our property." Jack mulled over her proposal, his fingers drumming thoughtfully against the kitchen table. "It's an intriguing idea, I'll give you that. But do you really think the HOA will go for it? They seem pretty set in their ways." Sarah's expression turned determined. "I have to at least try, Jack. Those safety signs are non-negotiable for me, but if I can find a way to make them work within the HOA's guidelines, then maybe we can avoid a drawn-out battle." Jack sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, I'm with you. What do you need me to do?" Sarah's face lit up with a triumphant grin. "Okay, here's the plan." Over the next few days, Sarah and Jack threw themselves into their DIY project, meticulously crafting a custom wooden sign that would both meet the HOA's aesthetic standards and convey their safety message. They sanded, stained, and carefully arranged the text and decorative elements, determined to create something that would impress even the most discerning HOA board member. Finally, the day of the HOA meeting arrived, and Sarah strode into the room, her handmade sign tucked under her arm. As the other residents murmured and exchanged curious glances, she approached the front of the room, where Margaret and the board members sat, their expressions wary. "Ms. Benson, I assume you're here about the violation notice," Margaret said coolly. Sarah took a deep breath, then unveiled the sign with a flourish. "Actually, I am. But I think I have a solution that might work for everyone." The room fell silent as the board members leaned forward to inspect the sign. Margaret's eyebrows rose in surprise, and a rare hint of approval flickered across her face. "Well, this is quite unexpected," she murmured, her tone softening slightly. It seems you've put a lot of thought and effort into this. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I have. I know the HOA has strict guidelines when it comes to outdoor decor, but I wanted to find a way to address the safety concerns in our neighborhood while still respecting those rules. Margaret regarded the sign for a moment longer, then turned to the other board members, exchanging a few hushed whispers. Finally, she turned back to Sarah, her expression thoughtful. Ms. Benson, I have to say, I'm impressed. This sign is quite tasteful and well crafted. I think we may be able to make an exception in this case. Sarah felt a surge of relief and excitement, but she maintained her composure. So, does that mean you'll allow me to keep the signs on my lawn? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, I believe we can make an exception, provided the signs remain in their current condition and placement. No additional decorations or modifications, understood. Sarah nodded eagerly. Absolutely, of course. Thank you, Margaret. I really appreciate your understanding on this. As Sarah and Jack left the meeting, hand in hand, they both couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They had found a way to navigate the HOA's rules and keep their family safe, and they had done it together as a team. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Jack's custom-made safety sign stood proudly on their lawn, a testament to their persistence and problem-solving skills. The neighborhood seemed to take notice, and soon other residents began to follow suit, erecting their own personalized signs to deter potential burglars. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched the transformation unfold. Her simple act of defiance had sparked a community-wide effort to enhance safety and security. It was a far cry from the initial confrontation with the HOA, and she couldn't help but feel a little smug about it. One morning, as Sarah was tending to her garden, she heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Glancing up, she was surprised to see Margaret, the HOA president, stepping out of her vehicle. Mrs. Benson, Margaret greeted her, her tone surprisingly cordial. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to check on your sign. It's been quite effective, it seems. Sarah straightened up, wiping the sweat from her brow. Oh, yes, it has. The neighbors have really responded well to it. Margaret nodded, her gaze sweeping over the various signs that had sprouted up along the street. Indeed. It's remarkable how a simple addition to one's lawn can have such a profound impact on the community. Sarah couldn't help but feel a touch of unease. Is there something I can help you with, Margaret? The HOA president's lips quirked into a small smile. Actually, yes. I was wondering if you might be willing to share your design with the rest of the neighborhood. We'd like to encourage all residents to follow your lead and install their own custom security signs. Sarah blinked, taken aback by the request. Really? I mean, of course, I'd be happy to. I didn't expect the HOA to be so supportive of this. Margaret's smile widened slightly. Well, as you know, the HOA is always looking to maintain and enhance the value of our community. And if these signs can truly help deter crime, then it's in everyone's best interest to promote them. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind racing. Yeah, of course. I'd be glad to share the design. Let me get you the details. As she hurried inside to retrieve the plans, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of surprise. Had she somehow managed to not only keep her own signs, but also convince the notoriously rigid HOA to embrace them? It seemed almost too good to be true. Once she had the necessary information, Sarah returned to find Margaret waiting patiently. The HOA president accepted the documents with a nod. Thank you, Mrs. Benson. I'll make sure this gets distributed to the rest of the community. I appreciate your cooperation on this matter. Of course, Sarah replied, still a bit bewildered. I'm just glad we were able to find a solution that works for everyone. Margaret inclined her head. As am I. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a few more stops to make. With that, She turned and headed back to her car, leaving Sarah staring after her, a mixture of confusion and satisfaction. As she watched the HOA president drive away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had stood her ground, refused to back down, and in the end, she had not only kept her safety signs, but had also managed to inspire the entire neighborhood to follow suit. It was a victory, both for her family's security and for her own sense of civic-mindedness. With a contented sigh, Sarah returned to her gardening, knowing that the safety of her community was in good hands, both hers and the HOA's. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood underwent a noticeable transformation. More and more residents followed Sarah and Jack's lead, erecting their own custom-made safety signs on their lawns. The once uniform street was now a vibrant display of personalized deterrence, each one reflecting the unique personality and style of its owners. As Sarah strolled down the sidewalk, taking in the changes, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. Her initial confrontation with the HOA had sparked a community-wide movement, one that had brought neighbors together in a shared effort to enhance their safety and security. But even as the signs proliferated, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The neighborhood seemed quieter, more subdued than it had been before. The usual chatter and laughter that had once filled the air had been replaced by an uneasy silence. One evening, as Sarah and Jack were settling in for dinner, the front door suddenly burst open, and their neighbor, Emily, came rushing in, her face pale and her eyes wild. "Sarah! Jack! Oh my God, you have to help!" she cried, her voice trembling. Sarah jumped up, her heart racing. "Emily, what's wrong?" "It's my house," Emily gasped, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Someone broke in while I was at work. They trashed the place and stole everything." Jack was on his feet in an instant, rushing to Emily's side. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, I'm fine. But the police say it's part of a string of break-ins happening all over the neighborhood. They think the signs we put up are making us targets." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What? That can't be true. The signs were supposed to deter burglars, not attract them." I know," Emily wailed, her hands trembling. "The police said the thieves are targeting homes with the fancy security signs, thinking they have valuable stuff inside. Oh God, what have we done?" Sarah exchanged a horrified glance with Jack, the realization dawning on them like a dark cloud. Their efforts to enhance community safety had backfired, putting their neighbors in even greater danger. "We have to do something," Sarah said, her voice laced with determination. "We can't just sit back and let this happen." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "You're right. We need to figure out a way to warn the others and try to stop these break-ins before someone gets hurt." As Emily continued to sob, Sarah and Jack quickly sprang into action, determined to find a solution before the situation spiraled even further out of control. They knew they had to act fast, but the weight of their unintended consequences hung heavy on their shoulders. Sarah and Jack quickly called an emergency neighborhood meeting, summoning their concerned neighbors to the community center. As the residents filed in, their faces etched with worry and fear, Sarah and Jack stood at the front, ready to address the situation. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning within her. "As you've all heard, there's been a string of break-ins happening in our neighborhood, and we believe the signs we put up are making us targets." Murmurs of shock and dismay rippled through the crowd, and Sarah raised a hand to quiet them. "I know this is upsetting, but we need to act quickly to address the problem. The police have informed us that the burglars are specifically targeting homes with those fancy security signs, thinking they have valuable items inside." Jack stepped forward, his expression grave. "So we're here today to ask you all to take down your signs, at least for the time being, until we can figure out a better solution. Your safety is our top priority, and we don't want to risk anyone else becoming a victim." The crowd erupted in a chorus of protests and panicked questions, and Sarah and Jack did their best to calm the chaos. "I know this isn't what any of us wanted," Sarah said, her voice rising above the din. "But we have to be realistic about the situation. Those signs are putting us all in danger, and we can't afford to take that risk." Finally, a voice from the back of the room called out, "But what about the burglars? Aren't the signs supposed to deter them?" Sarah sighed heavily. "That was the idea, but it seems we were wrong. The thieves are actively targeting homes with the signs, thinking they have valuable items to steal." Another resident, a middle-aged woman with a steely gaze, stepped forward. "So what are we supposed to do? Just leave our homes vulnerable?" Jack held up a hand, trying to placate the growing unrest. "We're working on a solution, but for now, we need to take the signs down. It's the best way to protect our families until we can find a better way to address the problem." The crowd erupted in a cacophony of angry shouts and protests, but Sarah and Jack stood their ground, steadfast in their conviction. They knew it wasn't an easy decision, but they also knew they had to act quickly to prevent any more of their neighbors from becoming victims. As the meeting drew to a close, Sarah and Jack watched helplessly as the residents reluctantly began to dismantle their carefully crafted signs, their faces etched with a mix of disappointment and fear. Sarah felt a pang of guilt in the pit of her stomach, but she knew they had no choice. Later that evening, as she and Jack surveyed the bare lawns, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right call. Had their efforts to enhance community safety inadvertently put their neighbors in even greater danger? The weight of that knowledge was a heavy burden to bear, and Sarah knew they had to find a way to make things right. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was a somber and unsettling place. The once vibrant display of personalized security signs had been replaced by bare, empty lawns, and the sense of community pride and vigilance had given way to a palpable air of fear and vulnerability. Sarah and Jack watched helplessly as their neighbors struggled to come to terms with the unintended consequences of their actions. The break-ins continued, with the thieves seemingly undeterred by the lack of visible deterrence, and the residents grew increasingly on edge, jumping at every unfamiliar sound or movement. One afternoon, as Sarah was tending to her garden, she heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Glancing up, she was surprised to see a police cruiser, its lights flashing. Her heart sank as she hurried over, a sense of dread building in the pit of her stomach. The officer, a young man with a somber expression, stepped out of the car and approached her. "Mrs. Benson, I'm afraid I have some troubling news." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "What is it? What's happened?" "There's been another break-in, this time just a few houses down." The officer's voice was gentle, but his words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry to say that the homeowners, an elderly couple, were injured during the incident." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. "Oh my God. Are they okay?" The officer shook his head, his expression grave. "They've been taken to the hospital, but the extent of their injuries is still unknown. The thieves were particularly violent this time." Sarah felt her legs grow weak, and she reached out to steady herself against the car. "This is all my fault," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "If I hadn't insisted on those stupid signs, this never would have happened." The officer placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with empathy. "You couldn't have known, Mrs. Benson. These criminals are ruthless, and they're targeting our community. We're doing everything we can to apprehend them, but we need the residents' help." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. "What can we do? How can we stop this?" "We need you and the other residents to be vigilant, to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity," the officer said, his voice urgent. "And we need you to work with us, to provide any information that could help us catch these criminals." Sarah straightened up, her expression hardening with determination. "You can count on us. We won't let them terrorize our neighborhood any longer." The officer nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. I'm glad to hear it. Stay safe, Mrs. Benson. We'll be in touch. As the police cruiser pulled away, Sarah stood there, her heart heavy with guilt and resolve. She knew she had to make things right, no matter the cost. Turning on her heel, she hurried back into the house, determined to rally her neighbors and take back their community.